My name is Diane Calloway. I'm 58 years old, and the night I finally stopped pretending I couldn't understand a word of Italian was the same night I saved my son's engagement and found out exactly who I had been hiding myself from all along. I want to tell you something before we get into this. I've been sitting on this story for almost a year now, turning it over in my mind the way you turn over a stone you found in a river, looking at it from every angle, trying to figure out if it still belongs to you, or if the water already carried the best parts away. It belongs to me. I'm keeping it. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please stay with me until the end. I should tell you about the job first, because the job explains everything. For 19 years, from 1993 to 2012, I worked as a certified legal interpreter for the Connecticut Superior Court system. Italian primarily, occasionally French, sometimes Spanish when they were short-staffed, though my Spanish was always functional rather than elegant, and I knew it. Italian was the language I had grown up half inside. My grandmother, Nonna Rosa, had come over from Calabria in 91 and never fully surrendered to English. She died when I was 24, and by then her voice was so deeply embedded in my ear that Italian didn't feel like a foreign language. It felt like a frequency I was born able to receive. I won't romanticize the job. Legal interpreting is not glamorous work. You sit in courtrooms for hours, sometimes translating testimony so painful you carry it home without meaning to. You interpret for people who are frightened or lying or both. You learn very quickly that language is not just words, it's the architecture of what people are trying to hide. A slight hesitation before a verb, the way someone drops their eyes when they switch tenses. You spend enough years in that room, and you stop hearing what people say and start hearing what they mean. My ex-husband, Patrick Calloway, used to joke that living with me was like living with a human lie detector. He said it affectionately at first. Later, he said it the way people say things they mean, but won't take responsibility for meaning. We divorced in 2017, 22 years of marriage, which is long enough that the divorce didn't feel like a fracture so much as a slow geological shift. The ground just finally admitted it had been moving the whole time. I won't give you the full anatomy of that. The important thing is that when it was over, I moved out of the house in Westport we'd shared since 1998 and into a smaller place in Fairfield, a 3-bedroom colonial that was too big for one person and exactly right for someone who needed space to remember who she was without anyone else's noise filling the rooms. Ryan was 31 by then. He'd gotten his structural engineering license the year before the divorce was finalized, and he was already building a name for himself at a mid-sized firm in Stamford. I had done something right there, whatever else I had gotten wrong. He called every Sunday without being reminded. He remembered my birthday without a calendar alert. He was, without qualification, the best thing I had ever made. I left the interpreting work in 2012, not because I was forced out, but because I was tired in a way that had nothing to do with hours. After 19 years of sitting inside other people's worst moments, I needed to be somewhere quieter. I transitioned into private consulting, helping law firms prepare for international depositions, reviewing translated documents for accuracy, training younger interpreters who came up through the certification program. The work was steadier, less emotionally expensive, and paid better than the court system ever had. But I stopped speaking Italian out loud. That's the part I didn't fully understand until much later. I still read it. I still watched Italian television sometimes late at night, Rai programming, old films, the kind of thing that feels like a hand on your shoulder when you're alone in a house that echoes. But I stopped speaking it the way you stop calling an old friend. Not because anything happened, exactly, but because the shape of your life gradually stops including them, and one day you realize it's been years and the silence has become its own kind of decision. Patrick had never learned Italian. In 22 years, he'd picked up maybe 40 words, and 30 of them were food. I think somewhere in the long geography of our marriage, I had learned to keep that part of myself folded up and put away the way you put away a good coat that doesn't match anything you currently own. It was still there. It still fit. I just stopped reaching for it. Ryan knew I had worked as an interpreter. He knew I spoke Italian. But knowledge and understanding are not the same thing. And I think for most of his life, the fact of his mother's Italian was one of those abstract biographical details that lives in the background. Technically present, never quite real. That changed on a Wednesday evening in late March of 2026, when he called me from his apartment in Stamford and said, without preamble, Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to be genuinely happy for me, not just politely happy. I told him I would do my best. I asked Valentina to marry me, he said. She said yes, I was genuinely happy, not just politely happy. Valentina Greco had been in Ryan's life for 2 years. And in that time, I had seen her 3 times and liked her more with each meeting. She was 33, a structural engineer like Ryan. They'd met at a conference in Boston, which was either romantic or deeply on brand, depending on how you looked at it. She was warm and direct and laughed easily and looked at my son with the kind of attention that meant she was actually seeing him, not a version of him she'd assembled from what she needed him to be. Her family was from Milan. Her parents, Roberto and Silvana Greco, still lived there, in the apartment near Corso Buenos Aires where Valentina had grown up. They were flying to the United States in late May for a long weekend at a rented property in Greenwich, a sprawling estate-style house that Roberto and Silvana's Connecticut-based business contacts had offered for the occasion. The plan was simple. Both families, one weekend, plenty of food, and the optimistic hope that everyone would get along well enough to survive a wedding planning process. Ryan called me the week before they arrived. Mom, he had his careful voice on, the one he used when he was managing his own anxiety by managing mine. Valentina's parents are wonderful people, but they're particular. Her dad built a manufacturing company from nothing. Her mom ran the mercantile side for 30 years. They're proud. They have strong opinions about things like family and tradition, and he paused. Just, please don't feel like you have to perform or anything. But also maybe don't lead with the divorce immediately. I told him I had no intention of leading with the divorce. I know. I want this to go well. For Valentina, she's been a little anxious about the whole thing. I told him I understood. I told him I would be warm and gracious and say all the right things. What I didn't tell him was that I already knew from 31 years of working with language and the people who use it to protect themselves that a weekend is long enough for the truth to find its way out of almost anyone. You just have to be patient and quiet and willing to hear what you're not supposed to hear. I had spent 19 years being exactly those things in a courtroom. I hadn't forgotten how. In the 2 months between that phone call and the weekend in Greenwich, I thought about Silvana and Roberto Greco more than I probably should have. I looked up Roberto's company, a precision manufacturing firm based in Milan, 40 employees, a solid regional reputation. I found a brief profile of Silvana in a 2019 Italian business journal, which described her as the financial architect behind the company's expansion in the 2000s. Formidable was the word the journalist used. I stored that word carefully. I also thought about myself, about what I was walking into and what I was bringing with me. I was 58 years old, 9 years out from the interpreting work, 7 years out from a marriage that had ended with the quiet erosion of someone who had spent 2 decades being told, in small increments, that the most interesting parts of her didn't quite fit. I had rebuilt myself in the years since, or I was rebuilding, which is a more honest way to say it, because you don't finish that kind of work, you just keep doing it. I had my consulting practice. I had my Fairfield house, which I had slowly made into something that felt like mine. I had Ryan, who called every Sunday. What I didn't entirely have yet was the habit of taking up the space I was entitled to take up. That was still a work in progress. I drove to Greenwich on a Friday afternoon in late May with a bottle of good Barolo in the passenger seat and a quiet, settled decision somewhere behind my ribs. Whatever happened this weekend, I was going to be fully present for it. Not performing, not managing, present. I hadn't decided yet what that would require of me. I found out soon enough. The house in Greenwich was the kind of property that announces itself. Stone gate posts at the entrance, a long gravel driveway lined with mature oaks, a main house that someone had clearly renovated recently but carefully, preserving the bones while updating everything that mattered. The kind of place that costs enough per weekend that nobody mentions what it costs. I arrived to find the driveway already occupied by a rental car with a Hertz sticker and two suitcases that hadn't made it inside yet. Roberto and Silvana had beaten me by an hour. Ryan met me as I was pulling in. He hugged me the way he has hugged me since he was a teenager, fully without self-consciousness, one of those hugs that communicates something neither of you could put into words without it sounding smaller than it actually is. They're already settling in, he said quietly, stepping back. Dad, Roberto. He's great, Mom. You'll like him, the kind of guy who has an opinion about everything, but somehow makes it interesting rather than exhausting. And Valentina's mother? Ryan was quiet for exactly one beat too long. She's great, he said. She just takes a little time to warm up. He had used the word particular twice in our phone call 2 weeks earlier. I filed warm up alongside it. Silvana Greco was not what I had expected, though I'm not sure what I had expected. She was 62, trim and immaculately dressed even for a casual Friday arrival. Dark, tailored trousers, a cream silk blouse, jewelry that was understated in the way that genuinely expensive jewelry is understated, never announcing itself. She air-kissed both my cheeks when we were introduced in the foyer and said, in accented but precise English, Diane, we have been hearing so much about you. Ryan speaks of you constantly. Her smile was warm in a professional way. Correct temperature, careful placement, the eyes were assessing. Roberto was easier. He was 65, silver-haired, with the handshake of a man who had spent decades in rooms where handshakes meant something. His English was more accented than Silvana's, but considerably more relaxed. He said, Ryan tells me you worked in the courts for many years. This is interesting work, yes? You must know how to read people very well. He said it with what seemed like genuine curiosity rather than the mildly competitive edge that question sometimes carries from strangers. I said that I had learned a few things over the years. Valentina pulled me aside before dinner to help set the outdoor table, which I suspected was partly genuine and partly a deliberate extraction from the main group. She was wearing a pale blue linen dress, and her dark hair was loose, and she looked the way people look when they're carrying excitement and anxiety in roughly equal measure and not entirely sure which one is winning. Thank you for coming, she said, handing me a stack of linen napkins. This means a lot to Ryan and to me. I told her it meant a lot to me too. And I meant it. My parents are. She folded a napkin with practiced precision and didn't look up. They love Ryan, they do. My dad told me last night that he can see why I chose him. But my mom has a picture in her head of what things should look like. And sometimes reality needs a little time to catch up to that picture. I said I understood that particular dynamic. She'll come around, Valenti said. She always does. She just needs to see things for herself rather than being told them. We had drinks on the back terrace before dinner. The property backed up to a wooded ridge, and in the early evening light was filtering through the oaks in long, horizontal bars, warm and unhurried. The six of us settled into the careful first evening conversation that everyone performed slightly, all warmth and surface, nothing yet at stake. Roberto asked Ryan about a bridge project in New Haven that had been in the local papers. Ryan lit up the way he always does when someone asks about work he's genuinely proud of, and the two of them fell into a surprisingly detailed back and forth about structural load distribution that made Valentina and me exchange a quiet look across the table. Silvana sat beside me on the low terrace wall. She asked about my consulting work. I explained it briefly. Legal document review, interpreter training, deposition preparation for international litigation. And before that, the court work, she said. How many languages? Italian and French primarily. Some Spanish. She nodded with a particular quality of nod that processes information and assigns it a value simultaneously. Italian is a useful language for legal work, she said, precise when it needs to be, emotional when it wants to be. I agreed that it could be both. She smiled, that same professionally warm smile, and turned slightly toward the view, in the way that people turn when they've decided a conversational thread is finished. That was the last thing she said to me in English for the next 3 hours. Twist 1. The sealed room Opensit began during dinner. The table was set inside in a dining room with tall windows looking out toward the ridge. Valentina had cooked osobuco from a recipe she said her grandmother had written on an index card sometime in the 1970s, which she'd been making since she was 12 years old. It was extraordinary. Roberto told her so in English, then said something to Silvana in Italian about the saffron in the risotto, low and genuinely approving. Silvana replied in Italian. Roberto answered. And then, between themselves, they simply stayed there in their own language, in the comfortable shorthand of two people who had been married for 38 years, and who, in the presence of people they believed spoke no Italian, had no particular reason to switch back. I understood every word. I sat at my end of the table across from Roberto, with Ryan on my left and Valentina beside him, and I heard everything that passed between Robertos and Silvana for the next 40 minutes. And I said nothing, and I watched my reflection in the dark window glass to make sure my face was showing exactly what it was supposed to show. Pleasant, engaged, entirely ignorant. The first exchange was harmless. Roberto said the Osso Buco reminded him of a restaurant near Porta Venezia that had closed during COVID, and Silvana said she had been thinking the same thing, and they were both briefly sad about it in the fond retrospective way of people mourning a good meal they can never have again. Then Valentina got up to bring out more bread, and Ryan followed to help, and Roberto refilled his wine and said to Silvana, in Italian, "He's a good man, strong. You can see it in how he carries himself." Silvana said, "Yes, his work is impressive. I looked at the New Haven project before we came. He knows what he's doing." "So what is the concern?" Roberto said. He said it gently, the way he said everything, not challenging her, just following the thread he knew was there. Silvana turned her wine glass slowly on the tablecloth. "The mother," she said. Roberto waited. "She seems diminished," Silvana said. "I don't mean that unkindly. She's clearly intelligent. But there's something I don't know. She went quiet a long time ago and hasn't found her way back. You can see it, the way she holds herself, the way she answers questions, always careful, always the minimum. A woman who has been told to take up less space." She paused. "I worry about what that teaches a son, about what a woman is supposed to be." Roberto was quiet for a moment. "That seems like a conclusion drawn from very little information," he said. "I know. I'm not wrong, though." I took a sip of my water. My hand was steady. I had spent 19 years keeping my face a neutral surface in rooms where far worse things were said, and I had not lost the skill. But this was different from a courtroom. In a courtroom, what you heard was not about you. The thing about being fluent in a language that the people around you believe you don't speak is that you develop a very particular kind of double vision. You hear two conversations simultaneously, the surface one, conducted in the shared language for everyone's benefit, and the real one, running underneath it like a current beneath ice. I had experienced this in courtrooms when defendants would whisper to each other in Italian during testimony, apparently forgetting or not caring that the interpreter was 6 feet away. They would say things they would never have said in English, about the witnesses, about their attorneys, about their own culpability. I would sit with my face perfectly still and translate what was being said for the record and hold the other things privately, knowing that what people reveal when they think they're unheard is often the truest version of what they are. That Friday evening, as dinner continued and Ryan and Valentina came back with the bread and the conversation returned to English, I sat with 2 full layers of information and chose, consciously, to do nothing with either of them yet. There was more. After dinner, when Valentina and Ryan were doing dishes, and Roberto had stepped outside to call a business associate in Milan, Silvana sat in the living room with a cup of coffee and her phone. I sat across from her with my own coffee, and we had the pleasant surface-level conversation of two people being careful with each other. She asked about Ryan's childhood. I told her about the years in Westport, about his early fascination with how bridges worked, how he used to build elaborate structures out of whatever was available. Books, kitchen containers, pieces of wood from the garage, and test them for load capacity with increasingly heavy objects until something finally gave way. She smiled genuinely at that, the first fully unguarded smile I'd seen from her all evening. Valentina was the same, she said, with geometry. She used to rearrange the living room furniture to prove a point about angles. She paused. They are well matched. This is not something I say lightly. I told her I agreed entirely. Roberto came back inside and Silvana said something to him in Italian, a brief, unremarkable domestic exchange about whether he wanted more coffee. He said no. She said fine. He sat down. And then, because the evening was winding down, and because they were tired from travel, and because they genuinely believed there was no reason to be careful, they had a conversation in Italian that lasted perhaps 8 minutes, and that I have turned over in my mind every day since. Silvana said she wanted to talk to Roberto about something she'd been thinking about since they arrived. He said, "The mother." She said yes. He said he thought she was being unfair. She said, "I'm not being unfair, I'm being honest. There's a difference." She set down her coffee. Ryan is exceptional. He's going to have an exceptional career. Valentina is exceptional. Their children will be exceptional. And I want those children to have a grandmother who can give them something, a sense of themselves, of where they come from, of what women are capable of. Not someone who, she stopped, Roberto said quietly. Finish the sentence. Not someone who spent 30 years disappearing into a marriage and came out the other side with nothing to show for it, except good manners and a smaller life than she started with. The room was very still. Roberto looked at his wine glass. Silvana said, "I'm thinking about whether to speak to Valentina. Before the wedding, just a conversation about what she's marrying into, about whether the foundations are solid." Roberto said, "You mean whether the family is good enough. I mean whether the family is strong enough. There's a difference." A silence. "The wedding is in October," Roberto said. "There's time to see more." Silvana said, "That's not a no." I set my coffee cup down on the side table beside me without making a sound. My heart was doing something loud and complicated behind my ribs, but my breathing was even, and my face was showing exactly what it needed to show. A woman pleasantly present and entirely elsewhere. Ryan came back from the kitchen a few minutes later, and the conversation folded smoothly back into English, and we talked for another half hour about nothing consequential. Then I said goodnight and drove the short distance to the guest cottage at the edge of the property, and I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time in the dark, not sleeping, not quite awake, just thinking. I thought about the 19 years in the courtroom. I thought about Patrick's voice toward the end of our marriage. "You're too controlled, Diane. It's like living with someone who has a professional distance from their own life." And how I had taken that as a criticism rather than a description of something I had learned to do in order to survive rooms that would have broken me otherwise. I thought about Ryan's careful voice on the phone the week before. "Please don't feel like you have to perform," and how easily I had reassured him, and how it had not once occurred to me to ask what he needed me to actually be, rather than carefully not be. Silvana was not entirely wrong about me. That was the part that sat in my chest like a stone. She was wrong about what it meant, and she was planning to speak to Valentina before the wedding in October, that I could not allow. Twist 2. The thing ran doesn't know the next morning, Saturday. I woke early and walked the property's perimeter before anyone else was up. The air was cool and clean, the light just clearing the ridge, a pair of red-tailed hawks riding a thermal above the tree line. I walked and thought and arrived at a decision. I was not going to say anything yet, not because I was afraid, not because I was trying to protect anyone's feelings in the fragile, temporary way that produces more damage than the original thing you were protecting against. But because I have spent enough years working with language to know that timing is not a minor element of communication. It is the structure that holds everything else up. Say the right thing at the wrong moment, and it becomes the wrong thing. Wait for the right moment, and the same words land entirely differently. I needed the right moment. What I did not know yet, walking through the dewy grass in the early morning light, was that Ryan already knew more than I thought he did. I found this out at breakfast when Valentina pulled me aside while Roberto and Silvana were getting coffee, and Ryan was outside on the phone. She said in a low and carefully controlled voice, "My mother said something to me last night after everyone went to bed. I waited. She said she wanted to have a conversation with me before the wedding about family things." Valentina's jaw was tight. She wouldn't say more than that, but I know what she means. She has a checklist. She always has had a checklist. I asked if she had told Ryan. Not yet. I didn't want him to. She stopped, pressed her lips together. He's protective of you. If he finds out my mother has concerns about his family, he'll say something direct, and it'll become a whole situation before anyone has a chance to actually talk. She made a small gesture with her hands that meant an entire thing I don't have the bandwidth for right now. I told her I understood completely. What do you think she's actually worried about? Valentina asked. Her voice was measured, but her eyes weren't. Her eyes were asking a considerably more direct question. I thought carefully about what to say. Then I said, I think your mother wants to know that the people who shaped Ryan are people of substance. I think she has a very specific picture of what that looks like, and she's concerned I don't fit it. Valentina looked at me steadily. She may be right that I don't fit her picture, I said. She is not right about the substance. Valentina was quiet for a moment. Then, what are we going to do? I told her to let me handle it. She said, how? I told her she would see. Saturday passed in the deceptive ease of a day that didn't know what it was building toward. The weather was perfect, warm without being heavy, the kind of late May afternoon that makes Connecticut feel like it's apologizing for the previous 6 months. And the property was beautiful enough that you could almost believe the day had no undercurrent. Roberto turned out to be genuinely excellent company. He and Ryan spent 2 hours in the afternoon looking at photographs of the New Haven project on Ryan's laptop. And Roberto asked questions that made Ryan recalibrate his thinking on at least 2 points in real time, which is the mark of someone who actually understands the subject rather than someone performing interest. By 4 o'clock, they were trading structural engineering disaster stories, each trying to top the other's worst miscalculation, and laughing with the ease of two men who had established that they spoke the same private language. Valentina and I made dinner together. She taught me her grandmother's method for fresh pasta, not from a recipe card, but from memory, the measurements communicated in the way family recipes always are. Approximately this much flour, just enough egg. The dough should feel exactly like this under your hands. We didn't talk about her mother. We talked about Ryan mostly, about a trip they'd taken to Portugal the previous September, about the apartment in Stamford they were planning to rent, a top floor unit with a view of the water that was slightly over budget and that they were going to take anyway. I watched her talk about my son and felt something settle in my chest that had been unsettled for a long time. She was going to be excellent. Whatever happened this weekend, she was going to be excellent. Silvana came into the kitchen at one point, ostensibly to get water. She paused and watched us for a moment, Valentina rolling pasta, me at the cutting board, and something shifted in her expression that I noted carefully but didn't react to. A reassessment, small but present. Dinner was wonderful. The pasta was perfect. Roberto made a toast to Ryan and Valentina that was warm and specific and clearly unrehearsed. Ryan's toast back was so straightforwardly earnest that Valentina pressed her face briefly against his shoulder. And then the thing happened. We had moved to the living room after dinner. Coffee, a bottle of Amaro that Roberto had brought from Milan, the relaxed settling in of a meal that had gone on long enough that everyone's guard was marginally lower. Ryan was showing Valentina something on his phone, photographs from the bridge project he'd been wanting to share all weekend. Roberto was reading the label on the Amaro bottle with the focused attention of a man who takes his Amaro seriously. Silvana said something to Roberto in Italian. Quiet, not quite quiet enough, she said. Tomorrow morning, before the others are up. I think I should talk to Valentina then, get it done. Roberto said, also in Italian. Silvana, I know you think I think you're making a final decision based on a day and a half, he said. I've made larger decisions on less information. About business. This is not business, Silvana said. Everything important has structure, Roberto. You know that. She glanced toward Ryan and Valentina, still absorbed in the phone screen. Then, the mother is a kind woman. I don't doubt that. But Valentina needs more than kindness from a mother-in-law. She needs someone who has built something, who can stand up, who can look her in the eye as an equal, not as someone who is simply grateful to be included. She paused. I want more than that for our daughter. I make no apology for wanting it. Roberta was quiet. I had my coffee cup in both hands. The Amaro bottle was between me and Roberto on the low table. The fire someone had started earlier, unnecessary for late May, but pleasant, had burned down to embers. Ryan looked up from his phone. Hey, does anyone want to walk down to the pond? The sky's clear enough tonight that you can. Ryan, I said. Something in my voice made him stop. Not the volume, I didn't raise it. The quality, the particular quality that meant, this is not a suggestion, this is a shift in gravity. He looked at me, I looked at Silvana, and I said, in Italian, in the full, unhurried Italian of a woman who had spent 19 years in courtrooms where precision was not optional, in the Italian she had grown up inside through her grandmother's voice from Calabria, in the Italian she had let go quiet for too many years and had just now decided finally to pick back up. I said, Silvana, I think you should have the conversation you're planning, but I think you should have it with me first, before tomorrow morning, before you say anything to Valentina. The silence that followed was the most complete silence I had experienced since my years in the courtroom. Silvana's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. Roberto's head came up slowly, the ways a man's head comes up when he hears something that confirms what he has been quietly suspecting. Ryan said very quietly, Mom? Valentina looked between me and her mother without moving. I kept my eyes on Silvana. I said, still in Italian, you've been having private conversations all weekend in a language you believed I didn't speak. I understand. I would likely have done the same. But I think you've reached a conclusion about me and about what I can offer your daughter, and I would like the chance to speak to that conclusion directly before it becomes something else. Silvana set her cup down. She said in Italian, her voice very controlled, How long have you understood? Since you arrived, I said. A silence. Roberto let out a long, slow breath, not shocked, more like a man who has just confirmed that the map he was working from was drawn to the wrong scale. Silvana said, The entire weekend. Yes. She looked at Roberto. He looked back at her with an expression that said quietly and without satisfaction, I told you the observation was incomplete. Ryan said, Mom, what is happening right now? I switched to English because this part was for everyone. Your future mother-in-law has been concerned that I'm not a person of substance, I said. That I've spent my life becoming smaller and have nothing real to show for it. That Valentina deserves a stronger foundation on her husband's side. I looked at Ryan steadily. She is not entirely wrong that I went quiet for a while. She is wrong about why. And she is wrong about what was there before I did and what is still there now. Climax 1. The first confrontation, Ryan stood up. Not aggressively, he was not built for aggression, but he stood because he was the kind of man who needed to be on his feet for the things that mattered most. I want to be clear, he said in the calm, precise voice he used when he was entirely serious. Whatever concerns exist about my family, they should have been raised directly, not in a language you assume no one else understood, not as a planned conversation for tomorrow morning before anyone was awake. Silvana opened. I'm not finished, Ryan said. Not loudly, just completely. Valentina put her hand on Ryan's arm, not to stop him, but to be beside him. I noted that. I noted it carefully. Ryan said, My mother spent 19 years in courtrooms as a certified legal interpreter. She speaks Italian and French fluently. She raised me, largely on her own after 2017, without ever once asking me to carry weight that wasn't mine, or take sides in something that had nothing to do with me. She built a career, rebuilt it when she needed to, and has been quietly teaching other people to do what she does for the past 14 years. He paused. I don't know what your picture looks like of what a mother-in-law should be, but I'll tell you what mine looks like. She looks exactly like her. Silvana was very still. Roberto said quietly, to no one in particular in Italian, half to himself, 19 years as a certified interpreter. Legal, I said, as Italian. Superior Court of Connecticut. Italian and French, 19 years. Something moved across Roberto's face that I had seen before in courtrooms. The expression of a person who has just recalculated an entire situation and found that the previous calculation was significantly off. It was not embarrassment exactly. It was more like the moment when a map turns out to have been drawn at the wrong scale, and everything you thought you knew about the distances is wrong. He said to Silvana in Italian, I told you the observation was incomplete. Silvana said nothing for a long moment. Then, in English, addressing me directly for the first time, without the buffer of her private language, I owe you an apology. Not yet, I said quietly. I would like to finish what I started. Climax 2, he speaks for herself. He set my coffee cup down on the table. I had been a legal interpreter for 19 years. I had learned in that time that the most effective thing you can do in a room that has gone wrong is to slow everything down and say only what you mean, without apology and without performance. You're right that I went quiet, I said. You're right that there was a time when I had built something, a career, a language, a particular way of being present in the world, and then I let it get smaller and smaller, year by year, until I was no longer sure what was left. Some of that was the marriage. Some of it was a choice I made consciously, to put Ryan first in a way that eventually meant putting myself last. I've been finding my way back from that for several years now. I paused. But quiet is not the same as empty. And a woman who has made herself smaller is not the same as a woman who has nothing. Silvana was listening. The professional warmth had been replaced by something more stripped down and honest. She was paying attention in a different way than she had been all weekend. The way people pay attention when they've stopped calculating and started actually hearing. I speak 2 languages fluently and a third well enough to be trusted with other people's most critical moments in them for nearly 2 decades, I said. I spent those years learning that what people say when they believe they're unheard is the truest thing about them. And what I heard from you this weekend, Silvana, underneath the assessments and the checklists and the very real desire to protect your daughter, was a woman who loves her child so completely that she would rather be thought unkind than watch her choose wrong. Silvana's expression shifted. Something behind it moved. I understand that, I said. I have a child, too. The fire had burned entirely to ash. The room was very still. Outside, through the tall windows, the oaks were dark against a clear sky. I'm not asking you to change your picture overnight, I said. I'm asking you to acknowledge that it was drawn with incomplete information. And I'm asking you not to have a private conversation with Valentina tomorrow morning designed to introduce doubt about a decision she has already made with her whole heart and her whole mind. I looked at Valentina. Because your daughter did not make this choice carelessly, and she does not deserve to have it second-guessed in a language her partner's family was assumed not to understand. Valentina's eyes were bright. She pressed her lips together and said nothing. Roberto said softly to Silvana in Italian, She's right. Silvana said nothing for a long moment. Then she exhaled, a long, slow breath that seemed to release something she had been holding for the entire weekend, maybe longer. She said in English to me, You said you left the court work in 2012. Yes. Why? Because I was tired, I said. And because 19 years of sitting inside other people's worst moments teaches you, eventually, to recognize when you are long overdue to attend to your own. A pause. Then Silvana said, You teach now, partly. Teaching is building something, she said. It was not quite a compliment and not quite an apology. It was something more honest than either, a woman updating a file and acknowledging, out loud, that the update was significant. Nobody went to bed for a long time after that. Roberto poured Amaro for everyone, and the room gradually found its way back to something that wasn't quite normal but was honest, which I have always found preferable to normal. Ryan sat beside me on the couch and didn't say much, but at one point he put his hand over mine briefly in the way he used to do when he was small, and something had happened that was too large for the words available to him. Valentina and Silvana drifted to the far end of the room, near the windows, and had a quiet conversation that I deliberately did not try to hear. I watched them in my peripheral vision, The way Silvana was standing, which was different from earlier in the evening. The way Valentina was holding her own body, which was less braced. At one point, Silvana reached up and put her hand briefly against Valentina's cheek, an old, practiced gesture, the kind that belongs to a specific and irreplaceable register of maternal love. I looked away and gave them that. Roberto came and sat beside me. He said in Italian, "You should have said something sooner." I said in Italian, "I know." I was deciding. Deciding what? Whether to protect the evening or protect something more important than the evening. He nodded slowly. He had the manner of a man who had made that same calculation more than once in his life and understood exactly what it cost. "My wife is not a cruel person," he said. "I know that," I said. "That was never the question. She has very high standards." "So do I said. "I've just never been especially loud about them." He looked at me for a moment with the expression of a person who has updated a significant file and is still processing what the update changes. Then he said, "Valentina told us you raised Ryan largely on your own after the divorce." "Yes, that is not a small thing." "No," I said. "It is not a small thing." He refilled my Amaro glass without asking, which I chose to interpret as a form of apology. Twist 3. What Silvana tells Valen next morning. Sunday, the last full day. I was in the kitchen making coffee when Valentina came downstairs, still in her pajamas, hair loose, looking like she'd slept adequately but not deeply. She poured herself coffee and stood beside me at the counter and said, without preamble, "My mother told me something last night, after everyone had gone to bed. I waited. She told me that you reminded her of someone." I asked who. "Her own mother," Valentina said. "My grandmother. She died in 2019. My mother described her as a woman with a very large inner life that she had learned to keep private, because the world she grew up in didn't have much room for it." Valentina wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "And my mother said she had spent years being frustrated by that in her own mother, not understanding why a woman with so much in her would choose to make herself small. And then last night she sat with it for a while and she thought maybe she had been asking the wrong question the whole time." I was quiet. "She said the question wasn't why you made yourself small," Valentina said. "The question was what you were going to do now that you decided to stop." I looked at my coffee for a moment. The early morning light was coming through the kitchen windows in long flat bars, and outside the oaks were entirely still, holding whatever the night had left in them. "What did you say to her?" I asked. "I told her I thought you'd already started answering that question," Valentina said. "I told her about last night, about the Italian." A pause. She said she knew. Twist 4. Rand's confession after breakfast, Ryan walked me down a path through the oaks toward the pond at the edge of the property. The water was dark and still in the morning shade, and a great blue heron was standing motionless at the far end, with the absolute patience of something that has nothing left to prove. We walked for a while without talking. Ryan had his hands in his jacket pockets, and the particular expression he gets when he is working something out and hasn't found the shape of it yet. Finally, he said, "I knew you spoke Italian." I looked at him. I knew it abstractly. The interpreter thing, the court years, the languages. But I didn't. He stopped, started again. "When I was growing up, Dad used to say things. Not big things, nothing you could point to. But he'd say things like, 'That was before your mother simplified,' or 'Your mother used to be very driven before she found her priorities.' And I think I just absorbed that framing without questioning it, filed the Italian and the court work in a folder labeled before, and didn't think about it as something that was still real, still present." He looked at the heron. "Last night, watching you switch into Italian and hold that whole conversation, I had the strangest feeling, like I was meeting someone for the first time. Except it wasn't a stranger. It was just a part of my mother that I had accepted being told wasn't there anymore, that I had let someone else file away for me." His voice was careful but not entirely steady. "I should have pushed back on that when Dad said those things. I was old enough to know better." "You were a child," I said. "And then you were a young man who called his mother every Sunday without being reminded and never once asked her to carry his feelings about his parents' marriage. Don't you dare add Dad's framing to the list of things you're going to carry for me." That list is already too long and none of it is yours. He was quiet for a beat. Then he let out a breath that was almost a laugh. She's going to be good for you, I said. Valentina. She doesn't let things go unexamined. No, he agreed. She really doesn't. He paused. Is that a warning? It's a compliment, I said, to both of you. The heron lifted from the water, then in one long, unhurried motion, and flew low across the pond toward the tree line, and we watched it until it was gone. Neither of us said anything. Some moments don't need words added to them. Twist 5. Silvana's offer after lunch. Silvana found me on the back terrace where I'd been sitting with a book I wasn't really reading. She sat down across from me in one of the low Adirondack chairs, folded her hands in her lap with the precise composure of a woman who had decided what she was going to say and intended to say it without revision. I want to tell you something, she said. In English, this time deliberately. I set the book down. When Valentina was 26, she went through a very difficult period. Her career was not where she wanted it to be. A relationship had ended badly, and she had not seen it coming. She came home for 3 months, and I watched her disappear into herself in a way that frightened me. Silvana paused. She was looking out toward the ridge, and her voice had lost the professional quality it had carried all weekend. I handled it incorrectly. I had a picture of what she needed to do, and I pushed her toward it, and she pulled away, and we didn't speak properly for almost a year. I said nothing. It was the worst year of my life, she said. Not because she was angry at me, because I could see her struggling, and I had made it impossible for her to let me reach her. She looked at me directly. What I should have done was less talking and more simply being present, without an agenda, without a checklist. A pause. I forget that lesson sometimes. I forgot it this weekend. I said, she told me you reconciled. We did. But we lost time we didn't need to lose. She held my gaze. I made assumptions about you that I am not proud of. And I said things in Italian, in what I believed was a private conversation, that I would not have said to your face. That is the part I am most sorry for. Not just the content, though I was wrong there as well. The fact that I was willing to say things I would only say if I believed I couldn't be heard. That is not a standard I want to hold myself to. I thought about that for a moment. Then I said, for what it's worth, the things you said were not entirely unfair. The part about going quiet. The part about making myself smaller than I needed to be. I paused. I have been working on that for several years, but I'm not finished working on it, she said simply. None of us ever are. A silence settled between us that was, for the first time all weekend, genuinely comfortable. The kind of quiet that exists between two people who have said the hard things and come out the other side of them. Then Silvana said, Roberto and I would like you to come to Milan, before the wedding. We would like you to see where Valentina grew up, where she comes from. I looked at her, and I think, she said, choosing her words carefully, it might do you good to speak Italian in a room full of people who will hear it properly. Sometimes you need a room that fits the language you've been carrying. She paused. There is a restaurant near the Navigli. Roberto's cousin runs it. It has been there for 40 years. It is the kind of place where a woman who spent 19 years as a legal interpreter and raised a remarkable son on her own would be seen for exactly what she is. Another pause, not as someone who simplified, as someone who is considerably more than she has been given credit for, including by herself. I looked at my hands for a moment. The afternoon light was long across the terrace stones. Somewhere in the oaks, a wood thrush was singing, unhurried and precise, the way wood thrushes always sound like they have all the time in the world. Then I said in Italian, in the full, unguarded Italian I had been carrying for 31 years and had stopped offering to anyone, the Italian of Nonna Rosa's kitchen and 19 years of courtrooms and late-night Rai A films in a house that echoed. I said, I would be honored to come to Milan. Silvana's expression did something I had not seen it do all weekend. It simply opened, she said, in Italian, and now her voice had warmth that was entirely real. Good. I'll send you the name of the restaurant. Roberto's cousin is an impossible man with impeccable taste. You will either love him immediately or want to argue with him for an hour before you love him. Either way, you'll get along perfectly. I laughed. It came out louder than I expected, and it felt good. The kind of laugh that has been stored up for a while and is relieved to finally have somewhere to go. Before I left Sunday afternoon, Ryan walked me to my car. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the gravel, then at me with the expression he gets when she wants to say something carefully and is making sure he has it right before he opens his mouth. Mom, he said, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer it actually. Not the way you answer things when you're trying to spare my feelings. I told him to go ahead. Are you okay? Not just this weekend, in general. Is there something you're building toward? Is there something ahead of you that you want? I thought about that for a real moment, not a polite one. The oaks were very still, and the light was doing what late May light does in Connecticut when it has decided to show off, long and gold and completely on your side. I said, I have been doing for the past several years what you do after a long time of making yourself smaller than you are. I have been getting used to my actual size again. I paused. It's slower than I would like, but I am not going backward. He looked at me. The Italian, I said. I'm going to use it again, properly, not just for work documents. I'm going to find a conversation group or a reading group or something that puts me in a room with it regularly. And I'm going to go to Milan in September before the wedding, and I'm going to eat at Roberto's cousin's restaurant and speak Italian to people who will receive it properly. I paused. And I am going to stop apologizing for the things that make me inconveniently more than people expected, Ryan said quietly. There it is. I looked at him. That's the answer, he said. That's the one I needed. He reached over and hugged me, the full hug, both arms, no reservation, the same hug he'd been giving me since he was 17. Against my shoulder, he said, I should have known better than to worry about you in a room full of Italian speakers. I laughed again. It echoed off the stone wall of the house and startled a pair of sparrows out of the oak nearest the driveway. I drove back toward Fairfield on the Merritt Parkway through the long corridor of oaks and maples that makes that drive feel, in late May, like passing through something alive and completely on your side. My phone in the cup holder lit up with messages one by one. Silvana, the name of Roberto's cousin's restaurant near the Navigli, with 3 specific dishes noted in brief and exacting detail, written in Italian. I read it at a red light in Greenwich and felt something in my chest that had been locked for a long time turn quietly open. Valentina, just so my mother literally never texts anyone restaurant recommendations. You've officially been inducted into something. I'm not sure what yet, but it's real. I read that one and smiled at the phrasing, at the gap between Valentina's easy American idiom and her mother's formal precision, and the fact that both of them somehow were now in my phone. Ryan, safe drive home. Call me when you get in. Love you. I put the phone down and drove. There is a version of this story where I stayed quiet all weekend, where I smiled and said the right things and drove home Sunday and never said a word in Italian to anyone. And Silvana had her conversation with Valentina on Monday morning, and maybe it would have been fine, or maybe it wouldn't, and I would never have known the difference either way. I would have gone home and put the Italian back in the box labeled before, and kept shrinking toward a shape that was never really mine. I did not stay quiet. I have spent a long time being a woman who knew things she didn't say, who heard things she didn't respond to, who carried a language and a history and a particular sharpness of mind folded up inside her like something stored for a season that kept not arriving. It turned out the season was this one. The life that had room for all of it turned out to be the one I was already living. I just needed to stop pretending I didn't know the language.
Okay, I need to take a breath after that one. What gets me isn't the big moment, isn't Diane speaking Italian and watching everything shift across the table. It's the years before that, the years of carrying something real and valuable and just not using it. Not because it was gone, because she had gotten so used to being told in small, quiet ways that it didn't fit anymore. You don't lose yourself all at once. You just get a little quieter, a little smaller, one small compromise at a time. Until one day you look around and realize you've been translating your own life into a language that was never actually yours. Diane didn't get her moment because she planned it perfectly. She got it because she finally stopped pretending the thing she was carrying wasn't there. If this story found you at the right moment, Poi, I hope you feel it. I really do. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next one.